had the experience that most of us have, especially when we're new teachers, that you put a lot of planning and time and energy and hope into a project or some kind of lesson plan or even a unit, and the response is possibly lukewarm, or even sometimes it could be sort of very negative, kind of almost hostile. So I've gleaned some basic truths about learners over the years, which I feel you can hold next to your heart and get you through those tough times, because it's important for you to find your own joy. That transmits nicely to the students. So let's start with basic fact number 1, that by virtue of being a human, by virtue of being a breathing individual, you have the capacity for joyful learning. I believe that's just a part of being human, and this can be discouraged by the experiences that a student has both before they come to school, and then once they arrive they may just continue with a somewhat joyless learning history. But regardless of that, across the spectrum, I have found there is an on switch in there, and triggering that allows a far more robust learning experience for the student. They get a lot more out of it. So anytime you're teaching in a joyless situation, it's going to feel a lot more like you're trying to spoon something down their throats, some nasty medicine, and they're going to resist that. They're not going to embrace it. They're not going to work with you. So when you can find their on switch, that opens the gates. I've also seen it happen as I was learning my way early on. You can hit the on switch triggers and they're anticipating a wonderful learning experience that somehow falls flat, and you can see it. You can see that you lost your moment. Not to worry, that's part of the learning curve. But what's important to understand when you're constructing these possibilities is that students really do crave authentic tasks. So you compare this to nutritional needs that a youngster who's not educated about their body's needs and the food pyramid and things like that may very well reach for the sweets, the empty calories when they need to eat a meal. And what child, isn't it a part of childhood to get queasy from eating too much sugar, like you just don't have any sense? So I think it's a common mistake for teachers to think that they have to dress up the task with games or make it fun. That isn't necessarily true. It needs to be appropriate, and the time spent on that aspect of it needs to be reasonable, but also that at the end of the day, the students know the difference. They have an inherent sense of when they're being well nourished. And there's a far more respectful atmosphere in your work, in your learning environment, if you honor that and you don't yield to trying to throw them the candy and somehow think that they're going to stay on board for the heavy-duty learning that you might ask of them. A final surprising fact that I'd like to share that I think is really important, and I have made some blunders with this one in the past, is if the class seems a little restless, a little off task, there's some of your usual suspects, you know, agitating off on the fringes there, and you think that nobody is listening, and maybe you sort of grouch at the whole class like nobody's listening. Well, usually that's not true. That's not true. If you actually do a check for understanding, you just kind of pause, and instead of getting angry and accusatory, if you say, all right, raise your hand if you heard what I just said we're going to do next. And you'll be surprised. These are like 2/3 of the class, typically. They heard what you said. Their little ears are open and perked up. They might not be looking at you. They might be multitasking with their brains and monitoring whatever silliness is going on the fringes that I referred to. But once again, they're here to learn. They get that. They buy into that. And all the lectures that you can give saying, you need to do this, you need to do that, you're wasting your breath. Instead, seek ways to trigger that on switch, to inspire them to see that reaching from their end, reaching out for the knowledge. And you, instead of thinking that you have to scoop it in like this, instead you are calmly beckoning them with your calm assurance that this is going to be worthwhile to learn, and that the learning process itself will be somehow satisfying for them.